On the 19th of September 1692, in a field near the Salem jail, an 80-year-old farmer named Giles Corey made a choice that would echo through centuries. Authorities placed increasingly heavy stones upon his body, demanding he enter a plea to charges of witchcraft. His crime wasn't sorcery, it was his refusal to speak. For 3 days, as Sheriff George Corwin methodically added stone after stone to the wooden board pressing down upon him, Corey maintained his deadly silence. Each time officials offered him salvation through submission to a trial he knew would end in his execution, he gave the same chilling response: more weight. Welcome to Vanishing Threads. Today we're exploring the story of Giles Corey, but this isn't simply another tale of the Salem Witch Trials. This is about how one man's final act of defiance has been preserved, investigated, and reinterpreted through digital archives and online research. This is the story of how the internet has become the guardian of America's most disturbing historical records, and how modern technology is helping us understand not just what happened in Salem, but why it continues to matter more than 3 centuries later. The story of Giles Corey begins not with witchcraft, but with violence that would haunt his reputation forever. Born in Northampton, England, around 1611-1621, Corey emigrated to Massachusetts Bay Colony sometime before 1640. He settled first in Salem town, then moved to Salem Village, now Danvers, where he established himself as a prosperous farmer. But prosperity did not bring respectability. Court records from the period paint a picture of a man frequently in trouble with the law, charged with petty theft, sleeping whilst on watch duty, and various other infractions that marked him as a troublemaker in the rigid Puritan community. The most damning incident occurred in 1676, when Corey faced charges for the death of his indentured servant, Jacob Goodale. According to witness testimony preserved in court documents, Corey had savagely beaten Goodale with a stick after allegedly catching him stealing apples. The beating was so severe that Goodale died several days later. Multiple witnesses, including his future accuser John Proctor, testified against Corey. However, because corporal punishment of servants was legal, Corey escaped the gallows, convicted only of using unreasonable force and fined rather than executed. This violent past would prove catastrophic when the witch trials began. In a community where reputation mattered enormously, Corey's history made him a natural target for suspicion. When supernatural afflictions began affecting young women in Salem Village in early 1692, and accusations of witchcraft started spreading like wildfire, those with questionable reputations found themselves particularly vulnerable. The Salem Witch Trials began in earnest in February 1692, when several young women, including Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, began experiencing mysterious fits and claiming to be tormented by specters. What started as accusations against social outcasts quickly consumed the community, eventually ensnaring respected church members and prosperous citizens alike. Giles Corey initially supported the proceedings with disturbing enthusiasm. When his third wife, Martha, expressed skepticism about the trials, calling the accusations foolish, Corey was reportedly amused by the spectacle and insisted on attending the examinations despite his wife's objections. According to historical accounts, Martha desperately tried to prevent him from going by removing the saddle from his horse, but Corey attended anyway, a decision that would seal both their fates. On the 21st of March 1692, Martha Corey was arrested for witchcraft, becoming the first full church member to be accused. The charges against her shattered the assumption that church membership provided protection from such accusations. Initially, Giles even testified against his wife, apparently believing the charges. However, he later attempted to recant his testimony, a move that only increased suspicion about his own involvement in witchcraft. The accusation against Giles himself came on the 18th of April 1692, when a complaint was filed by Ezekiel Chevers and John Putnam Jr. on behalf of several of the afflicted girls, including Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, and Elizabeth Hubbard. The complaint, preserved in the Salem Witch Trials documentary archive at the University of Virginia, accused Corey of tormenting the girls with his spectre. During his examination on 19th of April, Corey denied the charges. But the accusations followed the familiar pattern of spectral evidence that characterized the Salem trials. Ann Putnam Jr. claimed that Corey's ghostly form had visited her, urging her to sign the Devil's Book and tormenting her when she refused. Mercy Lewis provided particularly chilling testimony, preserved in court records. "I saw the apparition of Giles Corey come and afflict me, urging me to write in his book, and so he continued most dreadfully to hurt me, by times beating me and almost breaking my back till the day of his examination, being the 19th April 1692, and then also during the time of his examination, he did afflict and torture me most grievously." After his examination, Corey was imprisoned alongside his wife to await trial. The conditions in Salem jail were notoriously harsh, with prisoners chained and forced to pay for their own food and lodging. Many died in custody before their trials could take place. When Corey was brought before the court of Oyer and Terminer on 9th of September 1692 for arraignment, he made a decision that would ensure his place in history. Asked to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, Corey chose silence, a silence that would cost him everything. He stood mute, in the legal terminology of the time, neither pleading guilty nor not guilty to the charges against him. This wasn't a spontaneous act of defiance, but a calculated gamble with death itself. Corey understood the brutal implications of his silence. Under English law, a person who refused to plead could not be tried. However, to prevent people from escaping justice through silence, the law provided a medieval remedy. Peine forte et dure, literally strong and hard punishment. This archaic practice involved pressing the accused with increasingly heavy weights until they agreed to plead or died. Corey's refusal to plead was likely motivated by practical desperation rather than mere stubbornness. If he pleaded and was tried, his conviction was virtually certain. Not a single person who had pleaded not guilty to witchcraft charges in Salem had been acquitted. Upon conviction and execution, his property would be forfeited to the crown, leaving his family destitute. By refusing to plead, he could die without being legally convicted, preserving his estate for his heirs. It was a horrific bargain, his life for his family's future. On 17th of September 1692, Sheriff George Corwin began the pressing. The procedure, as described in legal texts of the period, was methodical and merciless. Corey was forced to lie on his back in a field near the jail. A wooden board was placed on his body, and stones were gradually added to increase the pressure. According to the law, he was to receive minimal sustenance. 3 morsels of bread on the first day, 3 draughts of water on the second, and so on alternately until he pleaded or perished. Contemporary accounts describe Corey's remarkable and disturbing endurance. Robert Califf, who witnessed the pressing, later wrote with clinical horror, "In the pressing, Giles Corey's tongue was pressed out of his mouth. The sheriff, with his cane, forced it in again." Despite what must have been unbearable suffering, Corey never cried out or begged for mercy. The most famous account of Corey's end comes from the diary of Samuel Sewell, one of the judges of the court of Oyer and Terminer. Sewell's entry for Monday, 19th of September 1692, preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society, reads with chilling matter-of-factness. About noon at Salem, Giles Corey was pressed to death for standing mute. Much pains was used with him 2 days, one after another, by the court and Captain Gardner of Nantucket, who had been of his acquaintance, but all in vain. Various accounts exist of Corey's final words, and they've become the stuff of legend. The most commonly cited version has him repeatedly asking for more weight when pressed to enter a plea, a final act of defiance that transforms his executioners into unwitting servants of his will. Another account suggests his last words were a curse upon Sheriff Corwin and the town of Salem. Regardless of the exact words, all accounts agree that Corey maintained his silence to the end, dying without entering a plea and thus preserving his estate for his family. Corey's agonizing end marked a turning point in the Salem Witch Trials. The horrific spectacle of an elderly man being slowly crushed may have contributed to growing doubts about the proceedings. His wife Martha was hanged 3 days later on the 22nd of September, but by October, public opinion was turning against the trials. Governor William Phips dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer in October 1692, effectively ending the witch trials. In the centuries since his demise, Giles Corey has been transformed from a disreputable farmer into a symbol of resistance against injustice. This transformation has been greatly aided by the digital preservation of historical records. The University of Virginia's Salem Witch Trials documentary archive, launched in the early days of the Internet, has made primary source documents about Corey and the trials accessible to researchers and the general public worldwide. The digital archive contains transcriptions and images of original court documents, including the complaints against Corey, witness testimony, and legal proceedings. These materials, once accessible only to scholars with physical access to archives in Massachusetts, are now available to anyone with an internet connection. The project represents one of the earliest and most comprehensive efforts to digitize historical documents, predating many similar initiatives by years. The online availability of these materials has enabled new forms of research and analysis. Scholars can now easily cross-reference documents, track patterns in testimony, and analyze the social networks involved in the accusations. Digital humanities projects have mapped the geographical and social relationships between accusers and accused, revealing disturbing patterns that were difficult to discern when working with the physical documents scattered across multiple archives. The Massachusetts Historical Society has digitized Samuel Sewall's diary, making his first-hand account of Corey's end available online. The diary entry about Corey's pressing has become one of the most frequently accessed documents in their digital collection, viewed by thousands of people each year who are drawn to this primary source account of one of America's most notorious executions. Modern genealogical research, facilitated by online databases and digitized records, has revealed new details about Corey's family and descendants. Researchers have traced his lineage and discovered connections to other figures in early American history. This work has been greatly aided by the digitization of church records, land deeds, and court documents that were previously difficult to access. The story of Giles Corey has also found new life in online forums and social media, where his defiant final words have become a rallying cry of resistance. His story is regularly shared on platforms dedicated to historical content, often accompanied by discussions about civil disobedience, legal rights, and the dangers of mass hysteria. These digital conversations have introduced Corey's story to new generations who might never have encountered it through traditional historical education. Archaeological investigations in Salem have also benefited from digital technology. Ground-penetrating radar and other modern techniques have been used to locate the original Salem jail and other sites associated with the witch trials. The results of these investigations are shared online, adding new layers to our understanding of the physical spaces where these events occurred. The legal aspects of Corey's case continue to fascinate scholars and legal historians. His demise represents the only recorded instance of pressing in American legal history, making it a unique case study in the application of English common law in colonial America. Digital legal databases now make it possible to trace the evolution of laws regarding the right to remain silent and the presumption of innocence, showing how Corey's case fits into the broader development of American jurisprudence. Educational institutions have embraced digital technology to teach about the Salem Witch Trials and Corey's role in them. Virtual reality experiences allow students to visit 17th century Salem, while interactive websites help them understand the social and legal context of the trials. These digital tools make the history more accessible and engaging for modern learners. The preservation of Corey's story online has also revealed the extent to which his end has influenced American literature and culture. From Arthur Miller's The Crucible to numerous novels and films, Corey's defiant stand has been repeatedly reimagined and reinterpreted. Digital archives of literary works and film databases allow researchers to trace these cultural influences and understand how historical events are transformed into artistic expression. Perhaps most significantly, the digital preservation of Salem Witch Trials documents serves as a stark reminder of the importance of maintaining historical records. In an age of digital information, the careful preservation and accessibility of primary sources becomes even more crucial. The Salem Archive demonstrates how technology can democratize access to history, allowing anyone to examine the evidence and draw their own conclusions about past events. The story of Giles Corey also highlights the ongoing relevance of the Salem Witch Trials to contemporary discussions about justice, due process, and the dangers of mass hysteria. Online discussions of his case often draw parallels to modern situations where public opinion and fear override legal protections and rational discourse. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of justice and the courage required to resist unjust authority. The digital preservation of Corey's story ensures that his final act of defiance will not be forgotten. In refusing to plead, in choosing to die rather than participate in a system he knew to be corrupt, Corey made a statement that resonates across centuries. His last words, whether more weight or a curse upon his persecutors, have become a rallying cry for those who refuse to submit to injustice. Today, as we navigate our own challenges with misinformation, mass hysteria, and the erosion of legal protections, Giles Corey's story remains disturbingly relevant. The digital archives that preserve his story serve not just as historical records, but as warnings about the price of courage and the importance of standing up to injustice, even when the cost is everything. The pressing of Giles Corey was intended to break his will and force his submission. Instead, it created a martyr whose story has outlived his persecutors and whose defiance continues to inspire more than 3 centuries later. In the digital age, his story is more accessible than ever, ensuring that future generations will know of the old farmer who chose death over dishonor and whose final words echo still. More weight. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe,